Hello and welcome to the Raw Podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name's James Copley and I'm joined as ever by my colleague Phil Smith. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Always better after a win.
Indeed. We'll quickly touch on that. I don't think we've had a podcast since the whole game, so we'll tackle those two games as a duo, so to speak. I think one of the things, Phil, about this team is they always seem to bounce back. I mean, it was hugely disappointing to draw that game against Hull, although it was a fantastic game. The disappointment surrounding Ekwar to give away the foul for the penalty and to sort of snatch a draw from the jaws of victory in the last minute was, the fan base felt really flat. But then to bounce back and keep a clean sheet against Cardiff, I thought was superb given the injury issues.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's 3 away clean sheets in a row, isn't it? Is it Cardiff, Burnley, Norwich?
Yeah.
When you put in the calibre of Burnley and Norwich, that's seriously impressive stuff. I think it was probably like the 2 games, taken as a whole, probably summed up where Sunderland are. I think at the moment, because of the personnel, I don't think they necessarily enjoy playing away from home more, but I think it's probably a little bit easier for them because I think you can see that when the onus is on the home team to play a little bit more. I think Sunderland have more space on the counter. I think it's much harder at home without that sort of natural striker. I think at the moment they're getting caught between trying to throw a lot of attacking players forwards to make up for the fact you haven't got someone naturally in the box and probably leaving themselves a little bit vulnerable. And I think for all the whole game, obviously, when you're literally, 2 or 3 seconds away from winning, it's a real kick in the teeth. But I think being brutally honest, on balance of chances, a draw probably was a fair result. I think, when you consider that really Sunderland could have been out the game really in the first 15, 20 minutes. And then also Hull go 3-2 up. And I thought the penalty, I actually thought it was a penalty on Clark, but it wasn't a stone wall. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like a stick on penalty. So, and then again against Cardiff, I thought they were excellent. I thought some of the football in the first 45 minutes was superb, but without anyone really in the box to make the most of it. In the end, really, Cardiff, it's appalling defending, isn't it? Letting the free kick through the wall. I'll forgive the goalkeeper because he probably doesn't expect the ball to come through. So while Sunderland deserved the win, they could easily have not won if that made sense because of that kind of lack of a striker and because of that lack of presence in the box. So I thought 4 points was probably a fair return. I thought it was a brilliant effort from the players, as you mentioned, with the injury issues. I think it kind of summed up why they're still just about in the top 6 race, which is a fantastic achievement considering everything. And it probably summed up why I still would have them as outsiders, because I still think in these final 5 games, these issues, availability issues, the depth and the lack of a striker, for example. I still think that will probably cost more points along the way. But it's a good time to be watching Sunderland, isn't it? Like you say, the spirit of these players and the way that they bounce back is superb.
I actually thought as well that it was a massive credit to the players on the pitch against Cardiff and to Tony Mowbray. A huge compliment, really. That Lamucci he couldn't really figure Sunderland out. He tried the double substitution. He tried changing it again, and Sunderland reacted to that quite well. And a bit of a makeshift back four, really, with the notable injuries to Ballard and Elise. Obviously, Luke O'Nien not travelling as well. Dennis Serkin coming back in after quite a lengthy spell out. And Sunderland dealt with some pretty shrewd championship operators who are big old units as well, and they stood up to that challenge. I thought that was, again, for me, and they've shown it throughout the season, impressive.
I thought it was a good selection, moving Hume across. Probably looks a little bit odd on the team sheet. We've never seen Trey Hume play centre-half before, but I think, if you look at how Cardiff have set up under Lamucci, they've invariably gone with 2 centre-forwards and 2 target men, really. What we know about Hume is that although he's not particularly tall, he's fantastic in the air. Yeah, and him and Bart were completely dominant in the first 45 minutes. And that just pushed Cardiff back. They couldn't get up the pitch because they were trying to play long balls, but they couldn't make it stick. And that really was down to Hume and Bart, who were both exemplary, really. I thought the second half, when he brought Atete on for Wickham, I thought Atete was much livelier and he sort of gave Cardiff a little bit of a platform. But I thought that was a shrewd selection from Mowbray, and I thought Hume really sort of paid him back, if you like. He did exactly what he was hoping he would do. And some of the football in the first half was fantastic. The way they sort of combined, especially down that right. It was sort of a back three / back four. Gooch getting really high when they had the ball. Some of the little interplay with Pritchard and Ahmad was tremendous, really. It was just that when they got the edge of the box on the byline, they had to stop and come back out again because, you look up and the one time they really got someone in the box was obviously quite a tight offside decision when Clark scores a good header. But, at the moment, they just naturally don't have those players who make that run instinctively. I think on another day, genuinely, with the centre forward, Brent in the 6-yard box, Ahmad could have had 4 or 5 assists because the amount of times he got himself into a brilliant position was incredible. I actually thought it was one of his best performances for Sunderland. He just didn't get the rewards for it because invariably when he was going to try and make that final pass or whatever, there just wasn't really anybody there for him to find. So, there was so much to like about the performance. I was thinking back to the last time we were there, which was the year Sunderland got relegated from the Championship, and I can't remember the exact scoreline, but Don got sent off, didn't he? And Sunderland
was it not
4-0 heavily beaten?
4-0,
yeah, it was
something ridiculous.
3 or 4-0, I think, off the top of my head. Obviously, Cardiff were in a very different place under Neil Warnock that season as well. But just to see Sunderland playing with such a clear style, such a clear identity, every player wanting the ball, was really pleasing to see. It's just at the moment, there is a big issue in that they're excellent from box to box. But they just don't really have anyone to sort of kill those games off. And that's obviously thrown it forward. That's a massive factor coming into these 2 home games because it's definitely a big opportunity for Sunderland. But it's 2 teams who I think, fair to say, are probably going to sit off the game. They're probably going to try and play on the break. And they're probably going to try and play for set plays as well. Because I think at the moment, especially if you're a team towards the lower end of the table, that's how you would play against Sunderland, especially at the Stadium of Light. We haven't quite seen whether Sunderland have got the answers to that approach yet at home with this current squad of players. I'm sure Geldhart will come back into the starting 11. And to be fair, I think he's improved a lot over the last couple of weeks, to his credit. But I'm still not sure we know whether Sunderland is sort of fully equipped to deal with that kind of game. I'm feeling really optimistic about the team and the sort of the general direction of travel. And I think it's great that we can sit here and have a proper conversation about the playoffs. I think that's an amazing achievement. But my instinct is at the moment that it's just probably a little bit of a hurdle too far. But it's genuinely great that we're at this point of the season and we're having that conversation.
Indeed. A couple of points that I wanted to make. I think it was 76% possession in the first half for Sunderland. It's just away from home. I think that's outstanding. I know Cardiff are pretty poor. I was talking to my dad after the game. He was there watching it. He's a Cardiff fan. He's just adamant that they're absolutely rubbish and nailed on to go down. So you do have to take it with a pinch of salt. Mentioned the 2 centre-backs there, Hume and Bart. I mean, I don't think they've gone under the radar in terms of signings, but the 2 of the less flashier signings when you compare them to Ahmad and Roberts and those flair players, but you will struggle to find 2 better signings from this recruitment model. They're both just sublime, absolute peanuts as well. We got Trey Hume from, I think Danny Bart was on a free or next to it. So yeah, a real glowing indictment. But these are the age-old questions on this season: where Sunderland would be if they had a striker. And you mentioned Geldhart. I think he has improved, and it's funny, isn't it, Phil? Because sometimes you need a bit of luck and you need the ball to fall to you. And Geldhart wasn't getting that at all, was he? But Clark was going for a shot there, and it skidded out to Geldhart, who's got a tap, and he's done well to finish it. But it's those little fine margins where football can turn.
I think it was nice to see him score sort of quite an instinctive, first time finish. I know it's a chance you expect him to take.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think so far, when we've talked about Geldhart, we've talked about a really talented player who probably we think is probably in the long term going to be more comfortable off a centre forward.
Yeah.
Because what we haven't really seen from him is a real sort of poacher's instinct, which isn't necessarily a criticism. I just suspect that's not really his game, or at least not at this sort of early stage of his career. And we did actually see that again. I thought he was good coming off the bench on Monday. I thought he caused Cardiff a lot of problems, and his work rate's outstanding. I mean, I think that's the one thing you have to say about Geldhart. Every time he goes on the pitch, he absolutely runs himself into the ground. And I think that's a big plus. But there was a little chance, actually, where I think it was Ahmad teed him up in the box, and he just took one extra touch and just couldn't quite get the shot away, and then Cardiff could break the block. And I think that's probably the area of his game where, in the long run, you probably think he's got the biggest improvement to make. And that'll probably just come with time and experience and exposure, I think. But I do think he's turned into a really sort of good squad player for Sunderland going into these last 5 games. But I just think at times, like I say, you could see Ahmad getting frustrated at times on the right because he
Yeah,
was, making these brilliant runs and then just sort of looking up and, it's either he has to try and take on another 3 players to shoot himself or come back out and slow it down. So, I think generally speaking, the team's in a pretty good place. But I just think if we, realistically, Sunderland have to win the next 2, I think. And they probably need to win the 2 of the last 3. And I just think when you look at the form over the last 10 games, while there's been a lot of positives, we're not really expecting any injured players back now. Obviously,
no,
09 should be available. I just see it as a stretch to see Sunderland probably winning 4 of the last 5 games. But stranger things certainly have happened. But it still feels like a bit of a stretch for me.
No, it does. We'll come on to a sort of broader look at the playoff picture and indeed the league, because we've both sat and predicted every remaining championship fixture, which is interesting, and we'll share our results. Firstly, though, Phil, can we talk about Pierre-Emerick a little bit?
Yeah, I think he probably. I think over the last week or so, it's probably sort of summed up where he is really coming back from the international break. I thought he started his full debut against Burnley, which the first thing to say is that's a pretty daunting environment to make your full professional debut with the form Burnley are in.
Yeah.
And I thought he had a pretty poor first 25 minutes, just because I think the pace of the game was a bit beyond where he was operating at that time. But I thought he got better and better.
I definitely cursed him.
I was going to be, kind and not mention it, but you have, so that's credit to you. But but then I thought he improved a lot, and I thought he had a really good start the second half before he came off, and that was kind of a big tick in the box, really. I think you can just see a player who's clearly got the ability. It's just about experience and exposure. Obviously, there's not really much to say about the whole penalty other than it's a bad error, isn't it? It's a bad decision. Yeah. Again, you can probably put it down to naivety. He sees the ball fall to the whole player. He wants to get out and try and affect it and make an impact and make a challenge. Just an experience, I think. Good call from Mowbray to put him straight in the team for Monday. I like that. I thought that was exactly the right way to handle it. And I thought he was decent on Monday. I thought, especially in the first half, I thought you could see he's starting to use his body more. He's starting to break up play a little bit more than we first saw from him. And he's got a lovely left foot. It doesn't always come off, but he's got good ambition when he tries to play those sort of big switches of play. So I think it's broadly been quite positive. Obviously, I know that sort of giving away that penalty against Hull, especially when you look at the table, obviously it feels doubly frustrating now because we're kind of saying, I stand by that. I think Sunderland will probably fall a bit short, and there's a reason for it. And Hull probably did deserve a point, but there's no getting past the fact that you do 2 kicks of the football away from being 2 points off the playoffs. But that's the project, isn't it? It's priced in. That's what the club have decided they're going to do. They're going to expose players who haven't had a huge amount of senior football to a very competitive level, and you have to accept that sometimes this is how it's going to go. But I think it's been a pretty big step forward for him. It's probably too early to say. Are we talking about a player who's definitely going to be competing for starts week in, week out next season? I think it's too early to say that. But I think we're starting to see signs of him matching his technical ability, which he obviously has, because you're not in Chelsea and West Ham's academies for so long if you don't have that, with a bit of an understanding about sort of the other aspects of the game that you need. In the Championship, and really we've seen Dan Neil on a similar journey, haven't we, over the course of the season? And it's probably going under the radar at the moment just how well Dan Neil's playing. Because if you said to us a year ago, that he'd essentially be playing as a holding midfielder, in the Championship, we wouldn't really believe that, because while he was, a hugely exciting player technically, that sort of off the ball work was still, well, he wasn't in the team this time last year, was he, for that exact reason?
Yeah.
And that's the journey, isn't it? And we're seeing sort of the impact that it's had on Neil now, who's playing unbelievably well in a what was previously an unfamiliar position. So I definitely think there's signs of encouragement with Ekwe. But like I say, like a lot of players in the squad, you're still looking at it thinking, are they going to be real sort of dependable first team players next season? It's a little bit early to tell.
You've got to wait and see.
And it's been a sort of a funny one, because I think we assumed at this point in the season probably Sunderland would have faded and these players would be starting a bit more regularly. But I think rightly so. I mean, Mowbray can't just put 5 or 6 young players in the team at once, because even as unlikely as it is, you've got an obligation to go after it, haven't you? Because there is still a chance. It might be a very slim one, but there is still absolutely a chance. I think he's managed that quite well over the last couple of games. Like I say, I think getting Eckler in from the start on Monday was a really good call. So I think he's managing that process quite well. And we are starting to see some encouraging signs, but there are still a lot of questions, aren't there, ahead of next season? Number one being replacing Ahmad.
Oh God, how
because
on earth do you go about that?
Because he's back to the level he was at probably 6 or 8 weeks ago. And
He's a
it's
joy to watch.
unbelievable.
I put a tweet out like, is he he's one of the best attacking midfielders I've ever played for Sunderland, probably since Sessegnon, who was doing it at a slightly higher level. But I think there's an argument to be made that he's got the potential to be better than Sessegnon.
I can't remember, the player is good in a Sunderland shirt. It would be going back to that era, Malbrong, Zenden, Sessegnon, Ben Chan. But
I actually think, sort of technically in decision making, I think Diallo's probably already surpassed Sessegnon. I loved Sessegnon; he was great, but he used to take on some horrendous decisions. His final ball used to let him down quite a lot. And again, he was playing at a higher level. But I just think Diallo he's almost got that eye of the tiger. He's very clinical, very cool, very calm, and he just always, or the majority of the time, seems to make the right decision, which is impressive given he's only 20.
I think a couple of things with me for Ahmad is his consistency and his work rate as well. I think, which probably separates him, because obviously you do see quite a lot of players with his level of technical ability. Well, actually, you don't. That's not true. But you know what I mean. Like you do get talented players in the Championship.
Who don't work.
While I'm not saying that he's like constantly tracking back and constantly making tackles, his work rate is very, very good. And his consistency, really, if we accept that it took him a while to get in the team as he sort of integrated, but if we go back to sort of October or November, from then on, he's only really had the odd 1-2 games here where he's looked tired and he hasn't been at his best. When you consider how little senior football he played before this season, it's incredible. And I think there have been times over the course of the campaign where he's carried the team a bit, and that's not a slight on anybody else. I just think that's the level he's been at. And probably my main regret from the season really is that he's probably only started 2 or 3 games with Ross Stewart in the team. I don't have the exact numbers to hand, but I think it will literally be maybe 2 or 3 after the World Cup break. And I think that's a real shame, because I think Ahmad would have been a serious supply line for Stewart. And I was thinking that again on Monday, the amount of times Ahmad beats his player and Stewart making those runs across the 6-yard box. I think they would have been a real force, something really special to watch. I think that'll be one of my big regrets, looking back on the season. I think it does leave a big, big gap in the squad for next year.
Absolutely huge. Shall we look at our Championship predictions, Phil? I'll start. I'll quickly whiz through the 3 relegation clubs. I've got Wigan bottom, Blackpool and QPR. Actually, I thought Reading would sneak in there, but I think Wigan cut adrift on 35, Blackpool 36 in my table, and then QPR just dropping into it on 43. Reading and Cardiff survive on 44. Obviously, Neil Warnock at Huddersfield does as well.
Yeah, what have I got? I've got Blackpool bottom on 35, Wigan on 40, and I've got Reading and Cardiff both on 45 points. So I've got one of them going down on goal difference. At this point, I'm going to go for Reading. I don't know. It's weird because I was surprised by how bad Cardiff were on Monday, and yet I still think they just seem to pick up enough results every now and then under Lamouchi.
He's a good manager, actually, I think.
I think that sorry, Cabba, who played up front for them, while he was pretty limited in some aspects of his game, he seems to have a knack of getting decent chances in the box. So I think he might just have enough to keep them up. And then I have QPR just staying up on 46 and Rotherham on 46 and Huddersfield on 47. I don't see Huddersfield going down now. I just see them picking up enough points. I do kind of feel they'll do it on Tuesday, to be honest. I just feel, I do feel a bit of a Warnocking coming on at the stadium.
100%. It's written in the stars. Like you mentioned it earlier in the chat at work, actually, that like if ever there was a team set up to be Warnocked, it's Sunderland, because we're technical, like to play, and Warnock will just be looking at us, licking his lips probably.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be a game that they kind of relish.
Yeah.
setting up that way. But hopefully Ahmad will stick one in from 25 yards in the first couple of minutes. But I definitely think Huddersfield stay up. So yeah, I'm going Blackpool, Wigan, and I'm gonna go Reading. Just I think that psychologically, I think knowing that you're pretty much safe, and then win this season when everyone expects you to get relegated, and then getting a 6 points deduction, I just think psychologically, that is pretty tough to take, and I think it might be quite difficult for them over the last few weeks of the season.
Reading seemed to me just to be like a club in complete turmoil. I found Ince's comments since they played Sunderland at the Stadium of Light. I've kept an eye on what Ince has been saying, and he seemed like a deeply frustrated man with his players, with the backroom staff. You've then got Andy Carroll taking a swipe at fans on social media. It just doesn't seem like a very good environment at the moment at Reading.
It doesn't.
And yet I've got them staying up.
Yes. Great punditry.
Yeah, no.
But I kind of had them and QPR in a similar boat, as in they've got all the sort of downward momentum, really. I think Rotherham, have had some good results. They don't seem like they're in a bad place, even though they're down there. Huddersfield's obviously in an amazing place. And I said, though Cardiff were terrible on Monday, they've had just enough results under Lamouchi. But I think, to be fair to QPR, I think when they've been so bad over recent weeks, but to come back away from home at West Brom and get a 2-2 draw, I think that's a pretty good sign for them. I think that suggests that they've sort of stopped the rot a little bit. So I do fear for Reading. I think they've got a big chance of going down as it stands.
Top two, Burnley, Sheffield United.
No, Burnley didn't quite make it for me. No, I'm joking. I've got Burnley falling just short of the points record on 104. And then I've got, Sheffield United, very comfortable second place, 88 points. I thought they were excellent at the Stadium, right? I think they've actually done a pretty good job of managing the pressure, I think, in recent weeks. Middlesbrough did amazing, really, to apply so much pressure on them. And I think especially when you consider they've had an FA Cup run as well, but a takeover uncertainty. I wasn't really expecting a huge amount from them when they came to the Stadium, because of the form they'd been in, but I thought they looked good. They had a lot of pace, they had a lot of quality. I know they only really won because of an offside goal in the end, but I thought they looked like a really good side, and I'm not really surprised that they've sort of recovered. I'm pretty confident they'll get over the line.
I toiled with Burnley, as bizarre as it sounds, when I was entering in these results, because on the one hand I was thinking, well, they've just won the league, so there might be a little bit of a drop off in terms of results. But then reading Vincent Kompany's comments and just getting a little bit of a feel for the man when they came to the Stadium of Light, and just his absolutely incredible mentality, where his team had just scored 4 goals and he was quite livid, really, with the defender in the first half. Obviously, Sunderland went 2-0 up in that game. I just can't see them dropping off, because he's just such a mentality monster. Whether they do or not, I don't know. The only game I could actually see them potentially coming unstuck in is the derby with Blackburn Rovers, because they'll have obviously playoff ambitions of their own. I'll rattle through my top 6 very quickly, and then I'll say where I've got Sunderland finishing, because they don't make it in my table, and then you can do yours. So I've got Middlesbrough in third on 76, Luton just below them on goal difference, 76, Blackburn Rovers on 5th, 73 points, and Millwall sneak in on 71 points ahead of Coventry on 70 points. I then have Sunderland finishing 10th on 66 points. I just think too many draws is gonna do for us in this last sort of little 5-game running.
Yeah, I have got Luton in third on 80, Middlesbrough in fourth on 79, Millwall in 5th on 75, and then I've got Norwich and Coventry both on 70 points. I quite fancy Coventry. I think they've got a relatively decent set of fixtures, and I think they've got the best striker in the league. So I always when I was going through picking each of the results, I just kept finding myself leaning towards Coventry. I also had someone finishing 10th with 66 points, which made it for a pretty boring end to the podcast, really. So good job. We put all this time into doing this. But I was the same as you. I had them winning a couple and drawing a couple in the last 5 games. I think it'll be a good end to the season. I definitely back them to get a couple of wins, but I just think with the squad as it is at the moment, I find it hard to see them going on that sort of relentless run. But I think, who did I have missing out? I had Blackburn missing out. Even though I was quite impressed with them against Huddersfield, I thought they played some nice stuff. But over the course of the season, certainly in the 2 games against Sunderland, I wasn't that impressed with them. So I can't really quite put my finger on them as a team this year.
I can't. I just feel like, similar to how you think about Coventry, that with the forward line they've got, and specifically Diaz, that when a moment comes along, you'd probably back him to take it.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. The other team I had fallen out was Preston, just because no slight on Preston really, but I just think they've got a really difficult run in. And I also definitely, one of the games I fancy Sunderland to win is down there on the last day of the season, because I would imagine there'll be an absolutely massive away support. There usually is at Preston last day of the season, and I just think the vibes will be pretty good from a Sunderland perspective. It's been a good season, football's been good. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of a party atmosphere there. So I think Preston could fall out on the last day, but I think just going through that process just underlined for me that I think Sunderland will end up pretty close. I think, which will be a huge achievement. But there will inevitably be a little bit of a sense of what if, because as we said
100%.
before, if you could have kept 1 or 2 players fit, especially in that forward line, there was definitely a group of players here who could, in different circumstances, if another striker had come in the window, or if another player had stayed fit, who I think could genuinely have done it, which kind of feels like a shame. But then that also seems like the wrong way around, because really it's been a fantastic season. If you'd said this to us at the start of the year, when we had a lot of uncertainty and concern really just about how someone would step up, we just said it was an unbelievable achievement. So you've got to kind of stick to that as well.
I think sort of expectations change throughout the season. That's completely understandable and fair enough, human nature. But I don't think it's reductive at all to point out that if you'd offered Sunderland fans mathematical safety in the Championship from relegation with 5 games to go, obviously we're looking more upwards now. But if you'd have told Sunderland that's a fact, that's going to happen, everybody would have been delighted, I think.
I think so. It's sort of been weird, isn't it? Because 2 things are true. That's absolutely true. And then it's also true that around the time that Sunderland beat Middlesbrough at the turn of the year, there was a team in place that was probably genuinely good enough to go on and finish in the top 6.
It's that what if, isn't it?
I think it's perfectly sort of normal and acceptable to have both those kind of emotions, really. But I think the thing for me is that the platform is there. But there's obviously a lot of variables going into the summer. What will happen with Stewart's contract? We seem like we're always bringing that up, but it's a really important summer for that, because he is going into the last year now this summer. If you can keep Stewart and bring another striker in, then you're attacking the season from a real position of strength. Obviously, there is the big question mark over. Well, it's not a question mark. Ahmad's not going to be here next year, is he? Because I suspect he's either going to be playing for Man United, or he's going to be playing for another top European team after moving for quite a lot of money. But again, realistically, you should think that Sunderland, I know they don't want to do too much business in the loan market, they want to develop their own players, but you think they're going to be in a really strong position if those top Premier League clubs want to loan out these players, because they've proven they'll give players game time, even ones who haven't had a lot of game time at other clubs. So, you have this sense of excitement, I think, looking forward, because there's a platform there, but there's just a lot of variables really at the moment. We don't know what the level of ambition and investment is going to be this summer, or whether it's again very, very gradual. I think that's all a little bit up in the air, but I think you have to say that to be able to sort of be relaxed and excited about the last 5 games of the season and looking forward generally to watching the team play, because of this, the way they play, it's a really good place to be, that we would have been thrilled with at the start of the season for sure.
I think that's a good point on the way Sunderland are seen in football generally, about loan players or even young players coming in from Premier League academies making that move to Sunderland. That's why I also think that, and I know this will never be perfect, but I think it's important for fan bases like Sunderland's to be, in the criticisms, constructive rather than destructive, and not try not to write players off too quickly. I know it can be frustrating when they make mistakes. I feel that frustration myself, but I think you just have to acknowledge sometimes how young these lads actually are, and the pressures that are on them, and how difficult a game football can be. one thing I want to touch on very quickly, Phil, before we go, we know the model is probably to sell a player at some point, in the name of sustainability. Sunderland have got the likes of Patrick Roberts, Dan Ballard, Jack Clark, who've come in and have performed and are probably worth quadruple, if not more, than what they were brought into the club for. Would you expect one player to go in the summer, perhaps, and that money to be reinvested, or do you think it's just one of those things where the club will come to that bridge as they cross it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think that I don't think there's any sense that Sunderland are in a position where they need to sell at this stage.
No.
And my instinct is that probably the level of players we're talking about, are they at the moment yet where a Premier League team's going to invest the level of money Sunderland would need to be tempted to sell? My personal guess at this point is probably not. If you look at Ballard, for example, he's had an outstanding season, but he's obviously missed a large chunk with it through injury.
100%.
That's not a knock on him. I'm just saying that I think maybe if you're a Premier League club, the kind of money we'd be talking about at Thames Sunderland, you might be looking at, you might want to see it from a slightly longer period. Dan Neil's an obvious one who I have absolutely no doubt Premier League teams will be scouting. They absolutely will. But he's just signed a long-term contract, which makes me think that this summer's not going to be one where that's probably on the table, unless it's a crazy big bid. I think more likely to be next summer. You might then be starting to have that conversation, depending on how Sunderland have developed. Anthony Patterson's heavily linked with Leicester City, but at the moment it looks like Leicester City are probably going to be a championship club.
And who knows what's going on there and who's making the decisions.
So there's another big variable. The one at the moment, you have to say at this moment has to be a possibility is Ross Stewart, because he will be going as it stands in the last year of his deal, without having agreed a new deal. And if Sunderland's model is to reinvest the money they generate, a team putting a decent bid in for Stewart would have to surely be at that point be considered. It's not what we want. It's not the discussion we want to be having, but that's just sort of the business side of it. Yeah. Obviously, the unknown with Stewart is the injury. When is he going to be fully fit? Will that have an impact on other teams? Will other teams look at it and say, we don't want to do it just now because we want to see how he recovers? I don't know. Those are all the variables. But if you're asking me right now, Stewart's probably the only one where I wonder and think, is that going to come back as a big discussion point this summer? The others, I think it's probably a little bit early in their journey at this level, I think, for us to start talking about big Premier League moves.
I just wonder about Clark, and probably a bit of recency bias there because there was the links to Crystal Palace, but just looking at his numbers across the season, with him having 19 goal contributions, scoring some eye-catching goals, all these things factor in, that finishing off that goal against Reading, all of this sort of stuff plays in the mind of recruiters. He's the one I sort of worry about as well. I don't think it would be a good move from, again, a little bit biased, I don't think it would be a good move from just yet. I don't think he's quite ready yet for the Premier League. Will he be at some point? Absolutely. I think he's absolutely fantastic, and he's a joy to watch. But he's one I really do worry about, actually, because I like watching him play.
Yeah, he's been tremendous, really. I think even when he doesn't play very well, by his standards, he has 2 or 3 moments in the game where he nearly produces something. I think he's so hard to defend against. We've seen it all year. Again, I think you might well be right. Again, my instinct is that Clark's another one who, at this stage, if you're a Premier League club, would you be prepared to invest just at this point, or would you maybe want to look at it and say, well, given how he's developed in the last 18 months, why don't we see where he is in another 12 months? Obviously, I don't have the answers to these questions, but I'd put Clark in a similar boat, Ballard and Neil, really, where I think I have no doubt that there will be a lot of Premier League teams paying very close attention to what they're doing. This summer still feels a little bit early in their journey for me to be talking about that. But listen, you don't know, and it will happen at some stage. As far as I'm aware, Dennis Serkin's coming in the last year of his deal as well, isn't he?
That's another big.
And so
question.
Again, that's another one where that would, hopefully we'll see some movement on that at the end of the season. But again, that would be one where potentially a conversation might have to happen. So. Yeah, I think it is a possibility this summer, but I don't see it. Yeah, I see that probably being another window or two down the line, apart from 1 or 2 where I think potentially the contractual situations mean it could become a factor again. Adding the injury in as a major caveat. Stewart's is the obvious one at this stage, but be a big gamble again because at the moment there wouldn't be another striker in the building behind him.
We are going to have to cancel the remaining Raw podcast because Phil Smith has just revealed himself as a man without the answers. What are we doing here?
I've been saying for years. That I don't have the answers. People have just let me keep going. So
nobody's pulled you up yet.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll probably leave it there. Obviously, Sunderland played Birmingham City on Saturday. Mowbray press conference tomorrow?
1 o'clock tomorrow, I think. Yeah.
Cool. We'll have full coverage of that, obviously, and the Birmingham City game at the Stadium of Light. And keep your eyes peeled for all of the analysis on the run-in and the lead up to the Huddersfield Town game as well. Once again, thank you very much for listening.